Well, hey, luckily I'm able to find some time. If you remember from Friday, I had an EBC thing. It was fun. There was always a good amount of questions. It's fun to see what people ask about, what they're curious about. So I think today I haven't figured out how to do any sort of like cool little things we're doing today. I don't really know if I would need to. But anyways, today what I want to go over is one, I'll give you kind of the final version of that presentation. I'm not going to go through it. There's just a couple of things I added in that I think are interesting for the narrative, if you like that kind of thing. And then two, one of the questions that I got was how to help operators sort of convert over, be excited about moving over to the new platform instead of sticks in the mud. And, I haven't really had people ask that too much. So it gave me a chance to reflect on what people have told me over the years and kind of put it together. So I'll go over that. And then there's a couple of just small miscellaneous things going on that I'll get to. So first of all, I would be remiss if I didn't remind you this week, you got VMWorld going on. It's September 29th to October 1st. You just search for VMworld. You can probably find it. It's all online and free, all sorts of stuff. Now, if you go to my Twitter account right now, which is, if you don't know, twitter.com/Coté, C-O-T-E, I put a link to a talk that Paul on my team is doing, and I have a small little segment in there. It's funny. I thought I'd been talking about one thing in this talk that I recorded, but then I went back to look at the slides, and it's something totally different. And I realized it's because he put the slides together for me. So I kind of, it's a rare instance because he puts together quality slides that I'm speaking to someone else's slide. Anyways, you should go check it out. He gives a good talk about Kubernetes stuff. And, my part, obviously, is the best part of VMworld. So you're going to want to watch that and tell your children. If you don't have children, just find some children and tell them about it in a very non-creepy way. Maybe what you should do is you should make your own video so that people can self-service looking at it. And it'll be the second best thing on the world following the first one. Joking aside, here's remember the last time on Friday, I went over kind of like a mock presentation. It was actually just a good way for me to rehearse presenting. I always worry about presenting stuff, especially these kind of EBC things and stuff like that. They frequently go well. There's one, maybe I'll tell you about one time that went terrible, which is, as they often say, these years later, we can all laugh at, and have a good time. But generally they go all right, but I do spend a lot of time consternating. But I realized that if I can actually create content out of practicing them, I want to practice more. So thanks for following along to that. Anyways, you may recall most of these slides here. I'll have to figure out how to make it do a little laser pointer. That would be super cool. But, I had these, so I added this slide. You see this one here? Now let me go into slide sorter. I don't know what it's called. But there's a narrative that I wanted to build up here, right? I also put my picture here because we were in teams and everyone seemed to have their camera off. And I guess you follow the norm of whatever it is. So there's my face. That's me. Look, as Josh Long would go, boop. Anyhow, I wanted to go over the products that we have because people always ask, what are the products? And if you start off with big macro stuff, they get it's kind of get lost. But I put this one in and the one after it, right? This is what you could call a boast slide. I often think of this as a boast slide, but it's basically with our customers, and you can see the references down here. They get performance improvements from, obviously working with us, but also by just changing over the way that they do software. And, when I put this slide together, a lot of what we focused on in our just digital transformation world is these things, your technical improvements, right? Which is fine. I added this one. Seems nice. No weekend work. I actually added that because I had 4 over here and I need 4 there. You want to make sure your slides balance out, but whatever. But, I say this every time, but I truly mean it. Like, these are the ones that I'm more interested in, right? So how did you directly affect the business? And there's, I'm always on the lookout for these. So if you know of any, especially in our customer base, that's always nice. Or if you're someone and you've got some metric. But these are good ones because they kind of go over achieving a business goal, or, something that's better than just developer productivity, which is fine, but it's in service of that. And then the only other thing that I really did is I added, and this is another slide that I have, and the way I do this narrative is like, There's these people who get astounding results, and but then most people are like this, right? Things don't work well. Now, I went back. I forget where I have a chart of this somewhere. I should show that one day. But I went and looked at all the publicly available Standish Group stuff for 13 years. I forget. And if you kind of look at it, it's kind of shocking because it's pretty level. Changes don't happen much. And only about 30% of software projects are successful. Now, they categorize them in failure, did not meet expectations, not quite that. It's like a job review. And then success. And more or less, like most every year, only 30% come in successful. And so anyways, I use this other stuff, to kind of go over some of the attributes, the tracers, if you will. I don't know if it's a leading indicator, a trailing indicator, or just some dumb donut on a chart. Again, jelly donuts, those are pretty good. But, there's some things that you can look at that show that you're not doing the behavior. Many organizations don't do the behaviors that lead to doing software better, to software success. So, this is a great narrative arc to have any presentation where, like, there's a great, nice, cool thing that you want, but there's problems, right? And it's also good when you're talking with people because it's a good thing visually to kind of see if people are, as they say, nodding their head and agreeing along. And it's a good way to kind of start the conversation. And then also, as always, I get to show off how much stuff I read with how small a font size I have to use, which is great. Now, that's about it. I just made some changes to that there. Oh, you remember I had a pretty bad call to action, so I improved that. I list all these things that you could do next if you're interested in the wonderful world of Tanzu. Sadly, there are no roller coasters you can ride, but there are things to do. So, if you want those, you should ask me, and then I'll know that someone cares and is interested, and I'll send you, wait for it, the OneDrive share that you can get them from. That'll be very exciting. OneDrive. All right. Well, you'll notice I've got these fancy backgrounds. Now, this is an advantage of working at a company, or I guess if you knew how to do your own stuff. But look, this is one of three. Maybe I'll have to cycle through other ones, but this is option 1, gradient. I also have option 2, which I think is not a gradient, but blue. And then I have totally black. Now, I like what they did down there with the little logo thing. That's kind of fun. But, I got that going on. So here's the first thing. I forget if I've mentioned here, but there's a, I don't know, I wouldn't call it a book. It's like two guys sitting at a table talking about DevOps stuff called Beyond the Phoenix Project. Now, it has Gene Kim and John Willis on it, and I think it's 14 hours. I got the audio version. I think I have the text too, but it's really better to listen to it. And, it's one of the things that runs through. I recommend it. I mean, 14 hours is a long time. You can put it on double play, but every now and then you might want to slow it down to listen closely to it. But it's good stuff in there. A lot of it I think I'm going to look at for my ongoing mindset book project. Anyways, I started reading, I think, the last Deming book because I'll be honest, it was free in the Amazon Prime thing. So I was like, oh, I should read that. And I think it's called New Rules for the Economy, New Economy, whatever. It's the last book he wrote. And there's a lot of great stuff in there. Now I'm listening to the audio version of it, so I don't know if there's footnotes. Hopefully there are. But it struck me that, well, one, it's a fun writer because it's very what's the word? One wouldn't say bomb throwing nowadays, but it's very iconoclastic or just very confident in things that he says. And it rests on an intuitive building up of things, right? Like he hates, that maybe hates, but he discourages people from doing management by objective and management by result, but also giving quotas and sales compensation, compensating salespeople based on their sales. He uses Houston's Gallery Furniture, with Mattress Mac. Now, my wife is from Houston, and if you don't know Mattress Mac, is guaranteed to save you money type of situation. It's very good. But apparently, their Gallery Furniture, they pay their salespeople a salary, and it works out better. I don't know. Trying to change how sales is done is like a quixotic quest. A lot of windmills and a lot of death on that journey. So, to those of you who are about to die, I salute you. That's good luck with that. Anyways, but it struck me that a lot of the arguments that he makes, and I haven't listened to everything, are very I guess, intuition or gut-based, right? So if you think about, he said, the reason that management by result is bad, and if I can summarize, if I remember. So an MBR is basically like, I think we call that outcome now. You hear people saying they're interested in outcomes, not the process. And the reason an management by objective is bad is basically like it allows you to shirk thinking about essentially learning, like constantly be evaluating and figuring out how things are working, what could improve, but also thinking about what goes wrong in the system to improve things. But then also equally importantly, knowing what your goals are, why you want to do something. And, it's not like there's like a chart or anything. It's just sort of like this, again, and I mean this in a good way, this mindset shift of like, that seems to be better. Which I think is a lot of like the type of things I want to write up in this new book, is just things that seem to be better, that we should trust in being better. Now, he has another sort of very mindset shifty kind of thing, which is, this is one of the more entertaining passages in the beginning where he goes over, what's a customer, right? And where do our ideas come from? And there's this notion of, customer first, and we should find the job to be done that the customer has. I think a job to be done is a good mixture of the following. But, it's essentially the position that we in the tech world know, right? That if you'd ask people if they wanted a car, they would say no, right? The horses are just fine. Or if you ask people, I think he uses carburetors. If you ask people if they wanted fuel injection versus carburetors, they would have been fine with carburetors. They wouldn't even know what a carburetor was if it was me. So essentially the point he's trying to make is that you can't wait for your customers to define what you should be doing. And instead, you need to constantly be innovating and coming up with new things, better ways to solve their problems. And because you don't want to rely on them, right? So that's sort of like, it's almost part of, he uses this phrase, quality. And what he means by quality, I forget the exact definition, but we in software, we would think of quality as QA, quality assurance, bug checking. But he more means that the overall thing is actually satisfying customers. It's something that they want to use, and it makes you money. This is like basically like from a Michael Porter viewpoint, kind of like competitive advantage, right? Like what is the differentiation? What is the unique thing that you have that makes people pay you more than your competitors? Now, in Porterian think, there's also you're just cheaper, which is differentiation, but it doesn't make them pay a premium or whatever. It's some change bank kind of math. But, being the cheapest offering is not what most organizations are going for. So anyways, I'll try to, hopefully there'll be some more interesting stuff. Also, I forget the dude's name, but the person reading it is great. He sounds like just some snarky old grandpa type who's reading things to you. But, in a good way, in a entertaining way. Not a bad snarky grandfather thing. All right. Well, so on the this talk that I had, hanging out with some people earlier today, like I said, one of the questions asked, I always spend a little bit of time going over how you win people over. Let me take a little drink here. I find these camping bottles are quite nice, and I finally figured out what you're supposed to do with these. Now, I got this. We brought this over from the States at REI, and it's got this lid. That's always seemed a little weird, but what you do, this is one of those things that I'm sure my grandparents realized as they were putting kippered snacks on crackers, and I wasn't paying attention, but you can unscrew it just a little bit. Look at this, and then you can pour coffee out. Now, I'm a big fan of the Yeti stuff, but what I've discovered over the years when I've paid lots of money for Yeti things is like basically any metal insulated thing works. When you're buying a Yeti, maybe it's a little better. It sure is cool. But you can use whatever you may have lying around the house. Also, it comes with this little cup, in case you didn't know how that operates. So, I'm always going over how you win people over, how you bring them to the platform. And one of the very common things that you hear about platform talk, one of the first things is that, and I think I mentioned this last time, is that people won't just go use it because it's good. There's not sort of like this platonic realization that we've proved it's good and showed it to you, and so you're going to go use it. You have to somehow encourage them to do it. And usually the conversation is around developers, but someone asked about operators. How do you win them over? And there's 4 things. I've written them down so that I can remember them. But there's 4 things I think that are important to think about. Some of them tactics, some of them not when you're talking to operations people. So we vendors, depending on how we want to pitch things, we can be terrible at the following. We will talk about efficiencies. We'll talk about the number of applications to the number of staff needed to manage those applications. And these numbers can be quite astonishing, but, based on actual customers. So if you think of that in a certain way, that currently you have, let's say, 50 operators, and when you move over to a more platformy, container, cloud native, whatever type of way of doing things, that you can have, if you have 500 applications and 50 operators running it, but now you'll be able to have 500 applications and just 10 operators running it. Now, I was a developer in the time of like offshoring and stuff, so I'm always looking for why someone wants to fire me. Now, it's kind of the opposite in that situation because you would offshore people and you could get like 2 or 3 people for the price being paid to me back in Austin, but whatever. But I think if you're an operations person, right, one, in my experience, you're generally a little more snarky and road wary than us, like, head in the cloud developers. We're always so optimistic about stuff. But you look at that and you're like, all right, so once there were 50 people and now there are 10, sounds like someone's going to get not working here anymore, which is a bummer. So instead of focusing on that, right, talking about how you'll be more efficient in those numbers, I think what's important to focus on is basically how you will be more efficient and therefore you'll be able to support more applications, right? That you actually, with your existing resources, you can grow and support doing more things. Now, that's not always what people choose to do, which I guess is, let me adjust this, and then you can see my gesticulating. Oh, you got to come this way for the good gesticulation. Yeah. So, that's not what people always choose to focus on. So good for them. But if you're trying to like win over operations people or anyone, it's always good to not start by saying you're going to fire them. That's just a pro tip. I don't have an MBA, but I think it applies. Now, less whatever that was. Well, I should add, there's this idea back when Puppet and Chef were very popular, and this was a worry that people had with those automation people. Luke Knies there brought up this thing called Julians Paradox, which is just, I don't know. It's one of these things that's called a law, but it's not necessarily a law. It's just like a historic study or something. A notion, one of those intuitive mindset things I'm kind of hunting after. But Julians Paradox, I think, was basically about the efficiency of energy in manufacturing. And I have to go look up the Wikipedia thing. It's got some charming woodcut picture from the 1800s. But it basically says that as a system becomes more efficient, you don't do less, you actually do more, right? So you have more spare capacity and you fill that capacity and you keep doing more and more. I mean, I think there's some interesting sort of studies that I don't really know the citations for, but it's almost like why things like the washing machine and the dishwasher were helpful, but then also became a reason for people to do more work, more domestic labor, which is kind of a bummer if, more than kind of, it is a bummer. So if you kind of sop up this toil, as SRE people would talk about it, you will find other things to do. And hopefully you don't fill it with more toil, but you fill it with something more valuable. So that's a fun thing to reference and look up. It's always nice to be able to use a woodcut. I love those quite a bit. Let me look. And so to that end, I mean, as I mentioned, that was the second thing is when appealing to operations people, I think it's valuable to sort of talk about this toil thing, right? And toil is basically like, I know there's some perfect definition of it, but it's basically like, to use the G-rated, I think, language. It's crap work. It's just like repetitive manual stuff that could be automated that like has not been automated. I mean, obviously, if it were automated, it would not be toil because it would be automated. But it's really just this work that has low value, that's repetitive. And what you're going to be doing, especially if you move over into the Tanzu stack and you do things with the kind of the Tanzu mindset, right? You'll be automating a lot of this toil work just like without even trying, right? Like the way that containers are built together, the way things are managed. Essentially, you have a kind of off-the-shelf, so to speak, developer workflow and operations workflow to go through. So there's all sorts of things that get automated for you, and throw in the build service and all of the there's even small things like if you use a Spring Boot app, it has a default way and template for how it hooks into the Kubernetes lifecycle for booting up, saying it's doing configuring, saying it's ready to run, doing a health check that it's good or bad, being told to shut down, and then shutting down, right? There's these very specific lifecycle hooks that a container has to go in. And like that stuff is handled. Then you layer service meshes on top, all sorts of things, right? So this stuff is not only toil for day-to-day work of operations people, but it's also a certain type of toil for architects and developers, right? So you're removing these things. And I think this should be appealing for operations people because, again, it means they can focus on more interesting things than just like, I think the analogy I used is like, I remember way back when, before streaming services, I used to have these mountains of MP3 songs. And it was always a fun task to go in and edit the tags, like the IDV3 things, and make sure that they were synced up. Put album art in there. There was software that would do this for you, but there was this meditative niceness of just like going in and doing it on your own, right? What's the name of that book everyone likes, the Magic Art of Tidying Up or something? It's kind of that same satisfaction. Now, that said, doing that for 4 to 6 hours for years on end for maybe a 20, 30-year career sounds like it would be terrible. And similarly, I think there's a lot of tasks that operators do that are like that. And so that's another way to bring them over is that their quality of life, the quality of work life probably will be much better with this automated stuff. And then there's 2 more. And then I'll just kind of wrap up here with a few small items. I got to take off in a little bit, go pick up my kids. It's very, very exciting. Anyways, I'll show you, if I can bring it up, I'll have to show you a picture of my daughter's new bike. Let me load up the photos here while we're talking. It's always unpredictable. I got 3 screens. Like, where's it going to show up? Well, I guess it doesn't matter because I'm not sharing a screen. But the other thing is, if you saw some of the episodes that Rick Clark and I had a couple episodes back, we were talking about how infrastructure people like to build things. And that can be, in our opinion, bad if they're building from scratch, doing complete DIY things instead of going with a distro. Obviously far superior to go with a distro like everything in the Tanzu Kubernetes area. Layer on top all the management stuff and the little wing dinghies that you need for it, backup services, security, things like that. And then you put your Tanzu application service in there to make development better. Clearly the best path to go. But anyways, like developers, infrastructure people like to build things. They build stuff. They have names like Big Iron and, cabling, and they love that. So when you're putting together a platform, even though you're automating a lot of things, there's still a tremendous amount of building, especially initially, that needs to go on. And I think you can appeal to operators that there's something new and interesting. You can come help build this. You can make a new thing and you can expand your skill set, right? I mean, this is a whole other, I think it would be a fun area to talk with someone about is that, everyone's always saying, surveys are always saying skills are hard and they can't find people. So the more skills you have in something, the better off you'll be career-wise. Now, you can go down a bad path there where you just gratuitously are doing a bunch of new things to build up skills. But done, in combination with other things, I think this tactic of saying, let's go build stuff, right? And rest assured, if you buy even the maximal amount of Tanzu, there are still things that need to be built out, right? When you take on a platform as a product mindset, right? Where if you kind of remember from my rehearsal presentation on Friday, where you as the infrastructure people, ops people, are always thinking about what developers need and building that in, you have something interesting to build, right? There's always interesting activities going on top of that sort of value line, to use some of our old speak for it. And then finally, there's I think another thing that I see people do is you sort of, and this isn't exactly a causal tactic, but it's a framing, which, I'm always a big fan of framing and modeling correctly. But you define a new role for people to be in, right? So you define this platform as a product role, right? And there's a couple of standard personas that if you talk with our platform people off in Pivotal Labs land, they go over. And, there's different roles that you have there. And so that's often another thing is that if you define someone's role differently, they start doing that. Now, you might have to convince them that it's a good idea, but you kind of have this clean slate you can start with to shift them over. Now, I've got a bonus item that I went over, and that is Sometimes, oftentimes, maybe even all times, you don't actually need to change all the operators over. You might end up doing what for several years ago, and amongst my people was considered a bad phrase, bimodal IT. Now, just for a little rant here, the problem with all of the chatter around bimodal IT was that, I mean, at least in the way that people were talking about it, I don't think anyone actually paid the $2,000 to $5,000 to go read the reports and the PDFs you would have to that Gartner published on this. And, because I've worked at organizations, I was able to read some of those here and there. And their idea of bimodal, unfortunately, I don't know, it did evolve, but I feel like they got a little freaked out when people like Jez Humble and others were just saying that they were, fundamentally wrong. But I think what's borne out, what I've seen in organizations is, I mean, the thinking around bimodal IT is weird. Like, it's a very straw person type of thing. But what I've seen borne out is that when you go into a large organization of 10, 50, 100, 500,000 people, and all of the thousands of applications and services that come with that, there's not like that button that you press and everything switches over. So indeed, you need to kind of strategize out what you're going to start changing slowly but surely on, my favorite is that I've observed is that start small and grow up as you learn how to do things. But you're going to be running stuff in the older way. Now, definitely, that doesn't mean, as always, one of my chief rules is if something is bad, don't do bad things, right? So try to improve the way that you're doing things. Try to learn from new methods, right? There's a lot that DevOps or even just a lean mentality you could take back to a sort of poorly gardened IT service management, ITIL way of doing things. So obviously you want to improve things. You want to move things over as makes sense to a more agile DevOpsy way of doing stuff. But it's just sort of like, I feel like it's organizational physics that you're not going to be able to just swap everyone over at once. And in fact, I would argue that you're probably not going to swap everything over at once, right? Or not at once, but ever, right? Like maybe in 10 years, maybe in 5 years, but things might change so much by then that I wouldn't really worry about it. You might divest of that company. It might become easier just to like lift and shift it over. You might determine that it's fine not to move it. I mean, all sorts of things, right? So I wouldn't get all torqued up about this notion of bimodal IT. And instead, and this would be a very Deming thing, it would be like, don't focus on, which modal you're running in or whatever. Focus on what needs to happen. Learn. Do you know, this is how the author sounds, does executive management have knowledge of what works? Are they learning? And so I think a lot of what he's gone over in that book so far is, another one of my favorite dad sayings is like, don't do dumb stuff, to put it in the G-rated way of doing things. But, there's always a lot of, I think, tactics that are good for winning people over. And, everyone's always saying the technology's not the hard part, it's the people, which I think is more or less true. I think there are hard technology problems, right? And there are things that are hard technologically if you don't solve them correctly, right? Like if you had to dig a hole and you didn't have the right technology, it would technologically be hard if you were using the wrong things. And even then, if you got a flimsy shovel and it bends, then you got a problem there. And there's multiple types of shovels that you got to sort out what to do. And maybe once you hit some rocks, like back in Austin, you got to get a rock bar. So there are technology challenges, but it's true. People are much more difficult. And I think it really does require a lot of caring and empathy, or if you want to be more cynical, knowing how to manipulate people based on their desires and kind of their reactions to stimulus and things like that. So it's always interesting to look at that. So just a few more items. Spring One, we used to call it Spring One Platform, so I always want to say Spring One Platform. But Spring One was a while ago, and for the first couple of weeks, they like to make you register to see these hidden unlisted recordings. But now they're all listed. If you just go to, search around for VMware Tanzu and YouTube. I still don't have a good show notes thing here, so I apologize for that. But you can go to, you can find the listings of all the talks in YouTube there. Now, what I like to do is I use this app, I think I mentioned called Downy, to just like download them and I listen to them as I bike around. If I really like a talk, I'll probably listen to it 4 or 5 times because I won't be paying attention to it close enough. I won't be able to take notes on a bike. I'll get distracted by, filing expenses or scheduling a meeting across time zones. So I really have to like sit down and write down the things that I like. Now, what's nice Let me see if I can find an example. Like I use, it's kind of, let me make sure there's nothing like super secret on here. Oh yeah. What even is that? That's weird. Let's see. You can imagine. Let me do something a little more simple here. What I like to do is, this is gonna not be too great. Let's see if I've actually got something open. This is the fun part. What I'm doing here, so I download the videos, and I will put them. Oh, this will be good. And I'll put them on my iPad. Oh, now you can hear her talking. And I will use the split screen thing in the iPad, which, if I was cool, I'd have this hooked up so you could see. But I use this note-taking app called GoodNotes. But you see what you can do is you can do a split screen where basically here's oh, you can't really hear me. That's funny. Here's Jana Werner talking about kind of lessons learned at Tesco Bank. So, you can watch the presentation. And then over here, I can be taking notes and be like, cool. And then I can even put in a time code. Anyways, this is you can't read that at all. But that's fine. But this is a good way to make myself focus and actually pay attention to what's happening in videos, because that's basically where all my content comes from. Not videos, but listening to other people. But so you can download those videos if get a little app. I use this thing called Set App. It gets you all sorts of utils and things. Which author? I forget which author I'm talking about. Oh, a while ago it was. I don't really monitor the chat very well. I should figure that out. Anyways, you can download them and listen to them, and it's also easier to focus on them if they're not in YouTube. So finally, as mentioned earlier, there actually is VMworld going on. It's again, totally free. Starts tomorrow, goes through October 1st. You can probably just go to vmworld.com and sign up for that. Now, let me see if there was anything else I wanted to go over, and then I'll just show you a picture of my daughter's new bike, and then we'll be out, and that'll be it for today. So before we get to that, of the 6 people watching, if you have any feedback or things that you think would be nice to go over, any questions you have, that's always nice to know someone's listening, but it gives me some content to look at. Otherwise, each day I'll just, and I'll try to do it daily. Stuff comes up, but we'll see what I can do. And I'm going to still try to do it at 11 a.m. Amsterdam time. I couldn't for obvious reasons today, but whatever. Anyways, I'll come up with stuff. Now here, let me set this up. Check out this cool new bike. We went and picked this up last night, and it was well worth it. I can't believe it was only like 60 euros. It's a nice, solid bike. That's my daughter. Totally pink, and even has lights. Now, they were very concerned about the seat. It had some cracks and wear, but whatever. I mean, I don't know. And it's got the nice wheels. It's in good shape. So she decided 2 weeks ago that she would finally learn to ride a bike without training wheels. She didn't really like riding bikes, and she always was too wobbly, and she just figured it out. Maybe I'll have a video at some point, but it's so fun. And then she had this tiny bike that was way too small, so we got her this big one. And when she was learning to do it, and still, it's there's very few things in recent years that have made me as genuinely happy as seeing my kids do accomplishments. And definitely being able to ride a bike. I mean, in this town, it's required, but it is quite the accomplishment to get to. So with that, as always, you can find me on Twitter at Coté. I don't know. You should subscribe to this thing in Twitch so you get notified when I do things. And if you have any ideas or you actually want a link, until I figure out a way to do show notes stuff, just, talk to me in Twitter and we can figure it out. Or if you really want to, you can email me at cotem@vmware.com. They don't ask you what email address you want at VMware. They give them to you. Sort of it's fine. They treat email like cattle instead of pets, or I forget you're supposed to use some new thing, but they just gonna assign emails out. So I'm Codem. That might be my new password. Not my password. My new radio call sign. Codem. With that, bye-bye.